Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today is Thursday, February 5th, 2026. We are opening a file today that I think for a huge percentage of the population feels like it was closed, sealed, and archived a generation ago.
Oh, for sure.
It's a story that really defines a specific era of American culture. But as we're going to find out, the book isn't just sitting on a shelf gathering dust. It is very much being rewritten.
It really is. And frankly, if you have been tracking the court dockets in California over the last 18 months, I'm talking specifically that window from early 2024 through the summer of 2025, you know that this specific file is actually radioactive. It is very much active.
We are talking, of course, about the disappearance and murder of Laci Peterson. Now, I know what you're thinking. For the listeners who were around in 2002 and 2003, this name alone probably triggers a very visceral memory. You remember the magazine covers and the grocery store checkout line. You remember the rolling news tickers on CNN. You remember the perfect American couple narrative that was just absolutely shattered.
It's the prototype.
It really is sort of the foundational case for the modern 24-hour true crime cycle.
It is the template. I often tell people, if you want to understand Gone Girl, or the way we consume the Watts case or the Idaho murders, you have to go back to Modesto in 2002.
Right.
This was the patient zero of trial by media. It really established the rules of engagement for how the public interacts with a high-profile investigation.
But our mission today isn't to rehash the Nancy Grace commentary or, all the sensationalism. We aren't here to play the good guy, bad guy media game.
No.
We have pulled the source material, the court transcripts, the appeal rulings, the forensic logs, and specifically the recent filings from the Los Angeles Innocence Project.
Yes.
We want to look at the nuts and bolts.
Yes.
We want to understand the timeline, the specific granular evidence, and why in 2026 we are still debating a piece of duct tape.
And that is the key. We are going to move past the emotional narrative and look at the engineering of the conviction. Because when you strip away the media circus, this case is actually a masterclass in the complexity of circumstantial evidence. How do you prove a murder when you don't have a weapon?
Right.
How do you prove a murder when you don't have a definitive cause of death?
It really is a puzzle. And I have to say, going through these notes and the research provided, there are details here that completely blew my mind. Things I had either forgotten or, never knew in the first place. We're going to talk about a meringue recipe on the Martha Stewart Show that became a massive legal battlefield.
Which is just wild when you think about it. But it turned out to be a surprisingly pivotal piece of evidence regarding memory and credibility.
And we're going to talk about the chemistry of concrete used for a driveway versus concrete used for boat anchors.
Yeah, the concrete is a whole rabbit hole.
And we're going to unpack a conversation about being a widower that took place weeks before the murder actually happened.
That widower conversation, frankly, that is the psychological anchor of the entire prosecution.
Oh, for sure.
It's the moment where the motive stops being abstract and becomes terrifyingly concrete. But, okay, before we get to the end, we need to set the baseline. We need to understand who these people were before the world knew their names.
Right. Because the tragedy only lands if you understand the facade, the American tragedy narrative. It relies on the idea that everything looked perfect. So let's go back to late 2002. Modesto, California.
The Central Valley. It's agricultural, it's tight-knit, it's the kind of place where people know their neighbors.
Exactly. And you have Laci and Scott Peterson. On the surface, if you were casting a movie about the American dream, you would cast them.
100%.
They are young, they're attractive, they're upwardly mobile. They've got the bungalow on Covina Avenue, the golden retriever named Mackenzie, and they are expecting their first child.
A baby boy. Due date, February 10, 2003. They had already picked out the name. Conner.
Laci was 8 months pregnant. And to understand the shockwave of her disappearance, you have to understand her personality. The sources described Laci Denise Rocha as just a force of nature. She wasn't just nice. She was vibrant.
She was the center of gravity for her family, a real planner, and she was a local girl through and through. She grew up visiting her father's dairy farm west of Escalon.
Right.
She wasn't just from the area. She was of the area. She understood the land. In fact, she majored in ornamental horticulture at Cal Poly. She was deeply connected to this idea of growth, of home, of family.
And the notes mentioned she was really striving for that, perfect housewife ideal. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way at all.
No, it was her passion.
She genuinely loved entertaining. She was an incredible cook. She was a massive fan of Martha Stewart. She took real pride in creating a beautiful home.
Which, again, sounds like a throwaway character detail, but that Martha Stewart fandom becomes a critical piece of evidence regarding the timeline of her death.
It's amazing.
It's fascinating how these mundane habits, what shows we watch, what recipes we try, become forensic data points in a murder investigation.
Then we have Scott Peterson. And here's where it gets really interesting for me, because I did not know about his background in sports.
It's a significant part of his psychology, I think. Scott was an only child of Lee and Jackie Peterson, though they both had children from previous relationships.
Okay.
He grew up in San Diego, in La Jolla, sharing a room with his half-brother. But his identity was golf.
Yeah, this blew my mind. He wasn't just a hobby golfer, he was a prodigy. I mean, he was beating his dad by age 14.
Oh, yeah. And get this, he was teammates with Phil Mickelson in high school at the University of San Diego High School.
With Phil Mickelson?
Yep. That puts you in a very specific tier of talent. If you are playing alongside Phil Mickelson, you are in the top, 0.01% of junior golfers?
That's incredible.
So he was recruited to Arizona State University, which is a powerhouse golf school, on a partial golf scholarship. He had legitimate dreams of going pro.
But those dreams derailed. And the reason why is...
Yeah.
Well, it sort of paints a picture of his personality, doesn't it?
It really does. The source material notes he was kicked off the team at Arizona State.
Why? What happened?
He took a potential recruit, a guy named Chris Couch, out for a night of drinking. The recruit's father complained to the coach, and Scott was out. Just like that.
Wow. So it's that first crack in the golden boy image. He has this talent, this huge opportunity, and he blows it due to a lack of judgment or maybe a sense of entitlement.
I think that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
So he transfers to Cal Poly, which is where he eventually meets Laci. But even there, he reconstructs this image of perfection. He was a chameleon.
And people bought it.
Completely. His professors at Cal Poly loved him. One is quoted in the file saying, "I wouldn't mind a class full of Scott Petersons."
Unbelievable.
He was a model student in agribusiness. He graduates, gets a good job in fertilizers, working for a European company called Trade Corp USA, earning $5,000 a month. On paper, he is the success story.
So they meet at a restaurant in Morro Bay where Scott worked. And Laci, she made the first move. She sends him her number. They open a burger joint called The Shack. They sell it. They move to Modesto, buy a bungalow for $177,000. It sounds idyllic.
It does. But there were cracks in the armor. And this is classic in these types of cases. The image didn't match the reality.
The finances.
Right. They were living beyond their means.
The sources point out they had about $23,000 in credit card debt.
That's a lot.
It is. Now, to be fair, Scott did have available credit, so they weren't destitute. But the pressure was there. 23 grand is a significant weight when you have a mortgage and a baby on the way.
And then there's the infidelity. We all know about Amber Frey, and we'll definitely get to her. But the prosecutors revealed later that this wasn't the first time.
Correct. There was an affair early in the marriage when they lived in Prunedale. So you have a pattern established.
You've got this foundation. Exactly. You have financial pressure, a baby on the way, which represents a massive responsibility and, a loss of freedom and a history of stepping out on the marriage. That is the powder keg sitting in that bungalow on December 24th.
So what does this all mean for that specific day? Let's walk through the timeline of Christmas Eve 2002. This is the timeline that the entire case rests on.
It's a timeline of minutes, really. Scott's narrative, the story he told police from day one, was that he last saw Laci at roughly 9:30 a.m.
Okay, 9:30. He said she was watching TV, specifically Martha Stewart Living.
And he recalled a very specific detail. She was watching a segment on meringue. He says she was planning to mop the floor, bake cookies, and then take their dog, Mackenzie, for a walk in the park.
Okay, a normal morning. Scott, meanwhile, decides to go fishing on Christmas Eve.
Which struck many as odd, but not impossible. He drives to the Berkeley Marina. That is 90 miles away from Modesto.
90 miles? That's not a quick trip.
Not at all. He claims he was fishing for sturgeon.
Now, you've mentioned before that sturgeon fishing isn't exactly a quick trip activity.
It absolutely isn't. Sturgeon fishing is a game of patience. You are fishing on the bottom, usually with bait like ghost shrimp or roe. It is slow.
So it's not like you just pop over for an hour.
No. To drive 90 miles, launch a boat, fish for maybe an hour or two, and then drive all the way back, it just doesn't make sense to a serious angler. It's a massive investment of time and effort for very little actual fishing.
Okay, so we know he was there, or at least in the area, because of cell tower data and the marina ticket.
Right. And he leaves a message for Laci at 2:15 p.m. saying, Hey, beautiful, I'm leaving Berkeley.
And that voicemail, that becomes crucial for his defense.
Maybe.
It's
What?
his attempt to establish normalcy.
Exactly. I'm just checking in. It's the digital footprint of a loving husband.
But here is where the timeline just crashes into reality. The witnesses, specifically the neighbors and the dog.
This is the aha moment for the prosecution. This is what blew the case open for them. A neighbor, Karen Service, finds the golden retriever, Mackenzie, wandering alone outside with a muddy leash.
Every time.
She testified she found the dog at 10:18 a.m.
Okay, stop. Let's do the math. Scott says he leaves at 9:30. The dog is found wandering at 10:18.
Exactly. That leaves a window of less than 48 minutes for Laci to finish her show, start her chores, get ready, go for a walk, and then vanish.
It's nothing.
It compresses the timeline incredibly tight. If Sky's telling the truth, Laci was abducted almost the second he drove away.
And there was another neighbor, Mike Chiavetta, who saw the dog at 10:45 a.m. But that service sighting at 10:18, that is the one that really pinches the timeline.
It's the anchor point for the whole prosecution theory.
Now, I want to circle back to the meringue, because this is a perfect example of how memory and evidence fight in court.
It's so fascinating.
Yes, the police initially said Scott was lying. They made a big deal of it.
Right. The investigators, they checked the broadcast schedule, and they claimed Martha Stewart Living didn't feature meringue on that day. They used this to say, see, he's making it up. His alibi is faulty from the start. But the defense, led by the famous Mark Garagos, actually pulled the tape. And guess what? There was a mention of meringue. It was a brief segment, but it was there.
So Scott was right about that one detail.
On that specific detail, yes. And that's what makes this case so difficult and so compelling. Scott was telling the truth about the meringue.
So what does that mean?
Well, does that mean he was telling the truth about everything else? Or was it a detail he anchored his lie to? He knew what was on TV when he left, so he used it to validate his presence and make the rest of the story seem true.
It's a truthful detail inside a larger lie.
Potentially, that's what the prosecution argued.
So Scott gets home. He finds the house empty. The dog is in the yard because the neighbor, Karen Service, had already put him back.
Right. And what does he do? He eats some leftover pizza, he washes his clothes, he takes a shower.
Which, again, people found so strange. Your 8-month pregnant wife is missing, and you're doing laundry.
Well, context matters. He claims he had been fishing, he smelled like fish and the bay. So washing clothes isn't inherently suspicious. But in hindsight, prosecutors argued he was destroying evidence. They argued he was washing away salt water, silt, or maybe even, blood or other trace evidence.
Then he calls Sharon Rocha, Laci's mom. He asks, is Laci there? And that is the moment the alarm bells ring for everyone.
Sharon Rocha knew immediately something was wrong. Laci wouldn't just vanish on Christmas Eve. She was too responsible. She was too excited about the baby. The police report is filed shortly before 6 p.m.
And the response was massive. I mean, I remember the news footage. It felt like the entire state of California was looking for her.
Oh, it was huge. 900 people searching, helicopters, dogs, police, fire departments from all over. It was an all-hands-on-deck situation.
Of course.
You have to remember, a missing pregnant woman is a critical missing case instantly. The resources that poured in were just astronomical.
But the detectives, a guy named Brocchini and another named Bueller, they zeroed in on Scott pretty fast. Why? What tipped them off?
It was his demeanor. We hear this a lot in true crime, but detectives, they rely on behavioral baselines.
What a normal person would do.
Exactly. And Detective Bueller described Scott as calm, cool, and a strange combination of polite and arrogant.
He wasn't acting like a grieving, terrified husband.
He wasn't asking the right questions.
Yeah.
Most people in that situation would be grabbing the detectives by the lapels, asking, what are you doing? Where are you searching? Did you check the park? What can I do to help?
Right. What's the next step?
Scott didn't ask those questions. He was passive. He would offer them coffee, open the door. But he wasn't pushing the investigation. He was just there.
And then the investigation pivots. It goes from a missing person case with a strangely calm husband to something much darker, because they find out about the other woman.
The Amber Frey bombshell. This changed everything. This gave them a motive.
So Amber Frey comes forward herself, right? The police don't find her.
She does. She was a massage therapist in Fresno. She met Scott in November of 2002. A friend set them up, and she had absolutely no idea he was married.
He told her he was single.
Yep. So she sees the news reports. She sees her new boyfriend's face plastered everywhere as the husband of this missing pregnant woman. And she calls the police on December 30th.
And she agrees to cooperate. She starts recording their calls.
And those tapes were devastating for the defense, utterly devastating. But there is one specific detail from before she even started recording, a detail that I think seals the deal for a lot of people regarding premeditation.
The widower lie.
Yes. On December 9th, that is 2 weeks before Laci vanishes, Scott is talking to Amber Frey, and he tells her that he is a widower.
Wait, say that again?
He tells her he lost his wife, and he says, quote, "This will be the first Christmas without my wife."
Whoa. Let's just sit with that for a second. Laci is alive. She is at home, 8 months pregnant with his son. And he is telling his mistress that his wife is dead and he's facing his first Christmas alone.
It's chilling. It shifts the entire narrative from a crime of passion or, an argument that went horribly wrong to a calculated exit strategy. He was already role-playing a life without Laci. He was mentally rehearsing his new reality.
He was building the foundation for his new life.
He was. And then there's the phone call during the vigil.
Oh, this is beyond belief.
It's painful to listen to. There's a candlelight vigil in Modesto for Laci. Hundreds of people crying, holding candles, praying for her safe return. Scott is there, and he calls Amber Frey from the vigil.
And he tells her he's where? Paris.
"I'm near the Eiffel Tower. The fireworks are going off." He's literally standing in a crowd of people mourning his wife, pretending to be celebrating New Year's in Europe. It showed a level of detachment and just sheer duplicity that the jury found impossible to ignore.
It's sociopathic behavior. There's really no other way to describe that level of deception.
It certainly displays a profound lack of empathy, to say the least.
So months go by. January, February, March of 2003. No body, no weapon, just this mountain of suspicious behavior and recorded lies. And then nature takes over.
April 2003. A massive storm hits the San Francisco Bay. It just churns up the bottom of the water, changes all the currents.
And on April 13th and 14th, the grim discovery is made.
A couple walking their dog at Point Isabel Regional Shoreline finds the body of a male fetus washed up on the shore. That was Conner.
And then the next day.
The next day, about a mile away, a jogger spots a female torso in the riprap, the rocks along the shoreline. That was Laci.
We have to give a warning here. The details are graphic, but they are incredibly important for the forensic evidence in the trial.
They are. Laci's body was in a state of advanced decomposition. She was missing her head, her arms, and most of her legs. Her internal organs were gone.
Why? Was she dismembered? That was the immediate rumor.
That was the rumor, but Dr. Brian Peterson, the forensic pathologist, no relation to Scott, he testified that there were no tool marks on the bones, no saw marks.
So it wasn't a deliberate dismemberment?
No. This was marine activity. The body had been in the water for months. The tides, the currents, the sea life. It had all caused the disarticulation.
But the baby, Conner, his body was more intact.
Yes. He had been protected by the uterus for a long time. It's a phenomenon called coffin birth, where gases from decomposition eventually expel the fetus from the body.
There was tape found on the fetus, right?
Yeah.
That becomes important later.
Yes. Plastic tape was wrapped around the fetus's body. Its origin was undetermined at the time, but it becomes a huge point of contention for the Innocence Project later on.
Now, the location. Where were these bodies found relative to Scott's supposed fishing trip?
That's the clincher. Scott told police he was fishing at the Berkeley Marina. The bodies washed up extremely close to that location.
Wow.
Expert testimony on the tides and currents suggested they had drifted from exactly where Scott claimed to be. It was, for the prosecution, the final piece of the geographical puzzle.
So 4 days after the bodies are identified via DNA, police move in. April 18th, 2003.
And the arrest itself is a piece of evidence. They had been tracking him. They were worried he was a flight risk. They track him to La Jolla near San Diego.
The getaway car.
That's what it looked like. Scott had dyed his hair and beard blonde. He claimed it was from chlorine in a friend's swimming pool, but the police weren't buying it. His hair was dark at the roots.
And the contents of the car. It wasn't just a gym bag and some golf clubs.
No. He had $15,000 in cash, 4 different cell phones, camping gear, a water purifier, survival equipment, Viagra, and his brother's driver's license.
I mean, you have to ask yourself, if you are an innocent man grieving your wife and unborn child, why do you have your brother's ID, 15 grand in cash, and a dyed beard?
Well, Scott's father, Lee, tried to explain it. He testified that Scott was using the brother's ID to get a local's discount at the Torrey Pines golf course. Again, golf is central to his life.
Of course.
And that he was living out of his car to avoid the media circus.
That's a very charitable interpretation.
Yeah, it is, but the prosecution saw it very differently. They saw a man about to make a run for the Mexican border.
So we go to trial. The trial of the century for that year. It's the battle of the evidence.
And you have to remember, the prosecution has a huge hurdle. They have no murder weapon. They don't know how she died. Was she strangled? Smothered. They think strangled. But they can't prove it because the head and neck were largely missing or damaged.
So they have to rely on the theory of the disposal, the anchors.
This is the mechanical heart of the prosecution's case. They allege Scott strangled Laci in their home, wrapped her in a tarp, put her in his truck, and then weighted her body down with homemade concrete anchors to keep her on the bottom of the bay.
He had a warehouse, right, for his fertilizer job.
Yes. And in that warehouse, they found a 90-pound bag of cement. Scott admitted he used some of it to make one anchor for his boat.
Just one.
Just one. But the prosecution said, where is the rest of the concrete? They theorized he made 5 anchors, 1 for the boat and 4 more for the body.
And there was residue, some kind of physical link.
There was cement residue on his boat trailer that matched the bucket rings used to mold the anchors. It painted a picture of him manufacturing these weights right before he left.
What about the hair? I remember a hair being a big deal.
A single hair. It was found on a pair of pliers in Scott's boat. Mitochondrial DNA matched it to Laci or any of her maternal relatives.
Why is that significant?
Well, the prosecution argued Laci had never seen the boat. Scott bought it secretly in early December, so if her hair is in the boat, it's because her body was in the boat.
But the defense, Mark Garagos, he fought back on this. Hard.
Vigorously. He argued that Laci could have been at the warehouse and a stray hair could have gotten on the pliers or in the boat. He also attacked the mitochondrial DNA science, saying it's not as precise as nuclear DNA. It doesn't point to one single person.
Yeah, the boat itself, it wasn't some huge yacht.
No, it was a small 14-foot aluminum fishing boat. A dinghy, really. Garagos argued it was incredibly unstable. He basically said if you try to dump a 150-pound body, plus weights, over the side of that little boat, you're going to capsize. He practically dared the jury to believe it was physically possible.
What about the concrete? Did the defense have an answer for that?
They did. This gets technical, but it's fascinating. Scott claimed he used the rest of the cement to repair his driveway. The defense brought in a concrete expert who analyzed the driveway. He testified that the concrete in the driveway had rock aggregate in it. The one anchor police found did not.
So there are different mixes. That sounds like good evidence for the defense.
It does, but the expert explained that the driveway concrete was poured over existing rocks, so it picked them up as it set. But it created enough doubt to say, maybe he really did just fix the driveway.
And Garagos also pushed a third-party theory, right?
Yeah.
That someone else did it.
The mystery van. Defense witnesses claim they saw a suspicious van in the neighborhood, and they claim some neighbors saw Laci walking the dog after Scott had already left for Berkeley.
So they try to break that 10:18 a.m. timeline.
They had to. But the prosecution rebutted that eyewitness testimony is notoriously unreliable. They pointed out that there were 74 reported sightings of Laci in 26 different states after she went missing. People see what they want to see. The hard data they stuck to was the dog being found at 10:18 a.m.
In the end, the jury sided with the prosecution, November 2004. Guilty of first-degree murder for Laci and second-degree for Conner. And he gets the death penalty.
It was a massive verdict. The whole country was watching. But that wasn't the end of the legal road, not by a long shot. And this brings us to the modern era of the case.
Right. Because in 2020, 20 years later, the death penalty is overturned. Why?
This was a technicality regarding jury selection. The California Supreme Court ruled that the trial judge had improperly dismissed jurors who said they opposed the death penalty in principle without asking them if they could still set aside those views and follow the law.
So it wasn't about guilt or innocence.
Not at all. It was a procedural error, so the conviction stood, but the sentence was tossed.
And in 2021, he was resentenced to life in prison without parole. Scott Peterson was officially moved off death row. But his teams didn't stop there. They filed a habeas corpus petition. And this was all about juror number 7.
Rochelle Nice. She became known as Strawberry Shortcake because of her bright red hair during the trial. The defense accused her of lying on her jury questionnaire to get on the jury.
She checked no on a box asking if she had ever been a victim of a crime. Is that right?
Correct. But it turned out that years prior, while she was pregnant, she had been in a domestic violence situation. She had filed for a restraining order against her boyfriend's ex-girlfriend.
So the defense argued she was biased. She wanted to punish Scott because of her own trauma.
That was the argument, that she was a stealth juror. This went to a big hearing in late 2022. I remember this being a huge deal. It felt like it could really overturn everything. It did. But Judge Anne Christine Masillo ultimately ruled against Scott. She said that while Rochelle Nice's answers were false, they were the result of sloppiness and a misunderstanding of the legal questions, not an intentional plan to get on the jury to convict him, so the new trial was denied.
Okay, so that brings us to the developments that have everyone talking in 2024 and 2025. The Los Angeles Innocence Project takes the case.
And this is significant because the Innocence Project is very, very selective. They don't take cases unless they feel there is a genuine avenue for exoneration, usually through new DNA evidence.
So what is their angle? What new evidence are they pointing to?
They moved away from the timeline and the juror misconduct and focused on physical evidence that was never tested with modern technology. Specifically, that piece of duct tape found on Laci's pants during the autopsy.
They think there might be DNA on the sticky side from someone else.
Exactly. If there is DNA on that tape that belongs to a third party, a known sex offender, for example, or one of the burglars, that blows the case wide open.
And they also brought up a burglary.
Yes. There was a burglary across the street from the Peterson home. The police always said it happened on December 26, 2 days after Laci disappeared. The Innocence Project argued there is evidence it happened on the 24th and that Laci might have stumbled upon the burglars.
That's a huge claim.
It is, and they pointed to a burned-out van that was found nearby with a blood-stained mattress inside. They wanted that mattress tested.
So what did the courts say? This has been a roller coaster over the last 2 years.
It really has. In May 2024, the judge gave them a mixed bag. She granted the DNA testing on the duct tape. That was a big win for them.
Okay.
But she rejected the requests for the other items, like the mattress from the van.
So they are testing the tape.
Yes. Then, in October 2024, the judge granted them post-conviction discovery, which means they got access to a trove of police files they claimed were suppressed at the original trial.
But then came the big blow in June of 2025.
Just about 8 months ago, yeah. The appeals court denied a massive 140-page petition from the Innocence Project that claimed evidence suppression. They basically ruled that the defense hadn't met the high burden of proof needed to overturn the conviction on those grounds.
So where does that leave us today, in February 2026?
We are in a holding pattern. We are waiting on the final, definitive scientific results of that DNA testing on the duct tape.
And that's everything.
That's the whole ballgame right now.
Yeah.
If it comes back inconclusive, or if it matches Laci or Scott, the road is likely at an end for him if it matches someone else. We are looking at a whole new chapter in this saga.
It's just incredible that after more than 2 decades, we are still looking at tiny pieces of tape and debating timelines down to the minute.
That is the legacy of this case. It really changed how we view circumstantial evidence, and it showed how a case without a single smoking gun can still result in a conviction if the volume of circumstances is overwhelming.
It also changed the law, Laci and Conner's law.
The Unborn Victims of Violence Act, signed by President Bush in 2004. It officially recognized a fetus as a legal victim if injured or killed during the commission of a crime against the mother. That is a direct result of this case.
And culturally, looking to source notes, the comparisons to Gone Girl are everywhere.
Gillian Flynn denied it was a direct inspiration, but the parallels. The media circus, the seemingly perfect but duplicitous husband, the public turning against him, it's all undeniable. This case created the template for the modern true crime obsession.
And financially, it ended with Scott losing everything. The life insurance policy went to Laci's mom, Sharon Rocha.
As it should, under what's called the Slayer rule. You can't profit from a murder you committed. He was also ordered to pay for the funeral costs.
So let's try to synthesize this. We have a deeply sympathetic victim, a deceptive and unfaithful husband, and a massive body of evidence that is overwhelming in its volume, but lacks that one definitive piece.
That's the perfect summary. It's a puzzle where you have 95% of the pieces. You can clearly see the picture is a duck, but you don't have the piece with the beak. And for some people, that missing beak is enough to say, maybe it's a rabbit.
But looking at the widower comment, the secret boat, the fishing trip, the dyed hair, and the cash, it's a very, very convincing duck.
It is. It's an incredibly compelling circumstantial case.
Before we go, I want to leave the listeners with something to think about. You mentioned earlier the difference between factual innocence and legal guilt. Could you expand on that?
Yes. The Innocence Project isn't always arguing that a person is a saint or a good person. They are testing the integrity of the system itself.
Okay.
If we convicted Scott Peterson based on a timeline that was off by 20 minutes, or if we ignored a piece of DNA evidence on a piece of tape, That matters for every case that comes after, not just his. The question isn't just, did he do it? The question is, did we prove it the right way, beyond a reasonable doubt, following all the rules?
So it's about the process.
It's about the integrity of the process. So even if that tape yields nothing, this case will always stand as this monument to the power and the peril of circumstantial evidence.
A chilling thought to end on. If you want to dive deeper into the timeline or read the full legal rulings we discussed today, you can always check source notes.
Always check the sources.
Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive. We'll see you next time.